I was really drunk the day we left port. Sarah had told me I shouldn't have stayed out so late with our group, but I figured that if we were spending 2 weeks pretending to be their friends, the congenial repartee had to start somewhere. Part of it was because I was trying to fit in with that elite crowd, but mostly I was nervous. This vacation was meant to be a second honeymoon for Sarah, to repair all the mistakes we had made in our marriage so far. So I said to myself I would take a day to work up the nerve and then propose to her with a new ring, even renew our vows. That never happened. I remember the morning sun hit the back of our elegant ship as we cruised past the last speck of land. Sarah took a picture of it while I recovered from a nasty hangover. The last good memory I actually have is vomiting in the toilet before passing out. That should probably paint a picture for you of things to come. It's the same ship. All 4 of us that boarded the strange vessel felt a sudden unease standing there in the darkness of the generator room, trying to make sense of it. Okay, maybe we're just jumping to conclusions. Ships can have the same name, I suggested. I wish I had been right, but Craig was already putting the clues together. Same name, possibly, but make and model? That's downright not going to happen. They register these ships in a database, he said. There was a silence again, and we all tried to articulate what we were feeling. This isn't possible, Greg stammered. Raymond was still coughing so loud it was hard to think. There has to be another explanation, Thomas said. Listen, I don't like it any better than you 3, but here we are. Now, how are we going to deal with this? Craig asked, his eyes focusing on me first. I felt a shudder roll over my body. To this day, I won't forget what he was suggesting. You don't want to tell the others? I asked, seeing his eye twitch nervously as we stood there together. We can't. Do you realize how much panic there will be on deck if people found out? They were practically about to riot just an hour ago, he remarked as Thomas nodded his head in agreement. Greg and I weren't so sure, though. The others will demand an answer about what we found over here, and we've hardly even explored a 1/4 of the ship. Maybe there's something else we can learn, he said. We tell them it's too dangerous. Thomas, you were in the Marines, right? Craig asked anxiously. Air Force, his buddy corrected. All right then, everyone will listen to you. If you say that we can't go back on board, then that's what will happen. You can't be so simple-minded, Craig. Just take a step back and look at this. This ship, it's the future. You saw those bodies. How long will that be before it happens to us? I told them all. I don't know, and I'm not about to stick around and find out, he muttered as we pushed aside more of the strange silky material, his eyes wild with fear as he added, when we get back across, we're going to get our families and go. You mean abandon the others? Raymond asked, still gasping for breath. I was thinking we needed to get him to a doctor before we made any hasty decisions. They'll come to the same realization soon enough. The lifeboats are equipped to sustain us for 10 hours on the water. That should be more than enough to find land somewhere, right? Craig suggested. Even Greg was starting to see this as a good plan. If we're really going to do this, then it needs to be careful and calculated. We all go together after we convene with our families, okay? I said. I have to find my wife and kids. Thomas agreed. And that was that. We made our deal with each other to keep the secret silent for as long as possible. I only wish it had lasted long enough. After crossing again by using the same technique with the tow line, we found ourselves in hot water with our significant others and with the security team. Mr. Brooks had returned to this section of the ship with about 3 armed men to contain the commotion that was stirring in the darkness of the ship. It had to be past twilight at this point, but without any means of telling the time, all I knew for sure was that I just wanted to get back to my room with Sarah and collapse. You 4, come with me. Deputy Captain wants to speak with you. The security director snarled. The other armed men were undoing our tow line to sever the connection between our ships, preventing any other would-be adventurers from exploring the ghost ship. We followed Mr. Brooks to the D-deck, where a few of the senior crew had gathered. Deputy Captain Vayach, these are the men that boarded the ship, Jacob said as he closed the door. Aside from the few emergency lanterns that the bridge crew had scrounged up, it was nearly impossible to see the man's face clearly. I could tell he was old and seasoned, like former Navy. the type that had experienced this sort of madness before, or so he likely thought. I doubt he was prepared for the story we were about to spin, and despite our reservations to keep the truth quiet, with armed men at our backs and a commanding officer questioning us, Raymond and Greg sung like canaries. The deputy captain didn't say a word as the two men recounted our short, harrowing experience. But when we were done, he merely turned to Thomas, Craig, and I and asked, "Can you verify their account, gentlemen?" Thomas saluted smartly. I nodded like a little child. Craig was doing his best to try and still seem brave. "What in blazes is this madness, sir?" I dared to ask, but the look the old man gave me told me he was no closer to an answer than we were. "Have you told anyone else aboard of your discovery?" he asked. "No, sir. We even agreed we would stay quiet about it to try to keep the peace," Greg said. Raymond was still coughing so much he could hardly stand. "What's the matter with him?" Mr. Brooks asked. Then Ray began to vomit up blood as he collapsed onto the floor. "He swallowed something aboard the other ship," Craig muttered as a few of the bridge crew moved to turn him over and keep him from biting his tongue. "For Christ's sake, you should have mentioned this earlier," Vyach snarled angrily. As he shook, I saw Ray's eyes roll back and he began to whisper the most unusual phrases. I'll never forget those words. "Suffer the children, collapse the tree, return the reunion." He moaned again and again as Mr. Brooks ran to find a medic, but it was too late. By the time they arrived, he had fallen into unconsciousness. All they got to confirm was that he wasn't dead yet. "He's severely dehydrated. We'll get him to the sickbay," the doctor instructed. "Is there anything else about your journey you may have failed to mention?" the deputy captain asked. I opened my mouth to apologize when all of us heard a shriek from outside. A few of the crew actually even visibly jumped a little at the blood-curdling scream. I pushed toward the door to peer out the windows as best as I could see what was happening. Then, above the scream was this humming, a droning sound that got louder with each passing moment. Something large zoomed past the window, the buzzing drowning all other sounds out as I fell back in alarm. "What was that?" I shouted. One of the officers tentatively opened the door to look out, then something grabbed his body and yanked him into the fog, crushing his chest like a peanut. "Holy shit!" Craig stammered. "Mr. Brooks, begin to sweep A through F decks and get everyone back inside their cabins," the deputy captain ordered. Jacob shoved us toward the stairwell as we heard more screams fill the air. "What was that? Did you see that?" I asked as we hurried toward the lower decks. Already people were cramming the halls, shoving one another about to get to safety. Throughout all of this, I heard the droning noise grow louder and louder. Something was attacking our ship. Something monstrous. All I could think of was finding Sarah. As Brooks and a few of his men struggled to maintain order, I slipped away with my friends toward the other halls that were meant for employees only. "What's happening here?" Craig shouted as we ran. None of us dared to even wager a guess. We pushed through more frantic passengers as we arrived at Deck M. Sarah was there amidst our small group, her face one of pallid terror.
"Oh, thank God. Are you all right?"
she asked, kissing me before I even got a chance to respond. The droning was growing louder. I pulled her out of the crowd and toward a conference room where we got a chance to breathe, and I recollected my thoughts.
"What the fuck is going on, Logan?"
Sarah said, trying her best not to cry. There was blood leaking out from under the door as we heard the ravenous shrieks grow stronger. Another moment passed as I held her close. Then the door slammed open and several from our tour group entered, some with injuries. "Isaac, you're bleeding," I told him as I got him a chair. Kevin, Holly, and another woman helped me with getting him elevated, and my wife ran to get some washcloths. Declan and Lincoln watched the door as more screams echoed the halls.
"Thomas is still out there,"
Holly said frantically. I heard Ray's wife ask about his whereabouts. Then I focused on Isaac as he stirred and tried to make sense of things. "Dear sweet Jesus, Greg, did you see it? What was that?" our group leader asked. My friend seemed in a daze, his eyes frantically darting about the room, trying to make sense of things. He gave me the look of a man who was losing his grip on sanity.
"Greg, you saw them? What were they like?"
Bonnie muttered. Finally, he seemed to be able to speak again, but what he said made little to no sense to us gathered there. I'm not sure. They were like scorpions, and also like leopards. Fast, immeasurably fast, and those eyes, there must have been thousands. It looked like a gelatinous mass, writhing and consuming everything. It was everywhere. When it looked at me, it felt like it was looking into my very soul. Craig stammered as he broke into tears. The droning noise grew more chaotic, and Declan pushed some of the furniture to block the door. That only caused Holly to go into more hysterics.
We can't just leave Tom out there.
Another loud shriek filled the air, and she began to sob and beg them to let the other survivors in. "Keep those doors closed," Kevin demanded, trying to calm her down as Isaac tried to pair up his own description with that of Craig's. The old man sounded even more confused as he muttered, "A scorpion? No, it's more like a spider or a shark, weaving its way through people with long, endless rows of teeth. It was as large as an ox, with no eyes at all, just a faceless mesh of mouths, ravenously devouring everything in its way."
This can't be happening. It can't be.
Sarah said as she clutched my arm hard and tried not to collapse to her knees. The whole room seemed to shake as more strange rumblings passed us by. Then Bonnie began to recite scripture.
"There shall be signs in the sun, and the moon, and the stars, and upon the earth distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring."
We turned to her, perplexed by the sudden religious inclination, and she twisted her hair absently before admitting,
"My mother used to make me behave with verses like that. Said we were closer than ever to the end times."
Declan laughed nervously. "There's no way that could be what's happening, right? I mean, that's just a bunch of mumbo-jumbo." Others in our group didn't seem so sure, and considering what I had seen firsthand, I too wondered about everything.
"None of us can know the day nor the hour, for the Lord shall come like a thief in the night."
Bonnie responded, "What matters is we stick together. If we do that, we will make it out of this alive," I told them. I didn't sound very convincing with the massacre happening right outside. Holly kept crying, desperate to reunite with her husband. "We should get some sleep," Lincoln suggested, another obstacle that seemed impossible to overcome. How could we possibly hope to rest when our fellow passengers were being torn in two by God knows what? All of us were thinking it, but no one argued with his sentiment either. "Got to keep our strength up to get out of here," he added. "Sure," Craig said, his eyes still delirious from the horrors he had seen. Sarah and I scooted near to the eastern wall, my wife wrapping her arms around her legs and trying not to cry. "I'm so sorry," I told her. She didn't even seem to be able to form words to respond. It made me think back to the reason we booked this cruise in the first place. I touched on it briefly before, and as I reflect now on that somber night as we laid our heads down to try to sleep amidst the sounds of pure torture, it's returning to my mind how fragile our relationship has been over the past 2 years. Sarah and I have been together for 6, and honestly, if you were to ask me where I thought we would be back when we first got engaged, I would have given you the standard response. 2 kids, nice house, living the American dream. That quickly transformed into an American nightmare for us when we decided to try to make a family for ourselves. First, there were the miscarriages. Those were rough enough to go through. And then I had to get surgery and learned I couldn't have any kids either. I remember seeing the disappointment cover her face like a shroud. Of course, the doctors talked about other methods, like in vitro fertilization and even adoption, but Sarah had already given up on it. We both knew it could be years before we were even eligible to fit the criteria of being a foster family. We tried so hard to look into everything to fix our problem. Went into debt searching for pills and natural herbs, but nothing worked. Our perfect life came crashing down around us. And if this cruise was indeed meant to be the culmination of everything we worked so hard to achieve, it only further proved how broken we were by it becoming another disaster in our own fracturing lives. We have always been distant with each other, almost going in opposite directions, like 2 ships on very different routes. All I wanted was to make a course correction, get us back on track. Slowly, in the dark that crowded that conference room, as the noise rose and fell like the tide, she reached for my hand. Bonnie was leading the group in a prayer circle, thinking any kind of show of devout penance might help now. I don't know if that was the reason why Sarah reached out to me in that instance or not. but I simply know I felt her squeeze my hand in a way I hadn't felt for so long that I refused to let go of that feeling. It's the kind of thing that can make even the most difficult nights a little more calm.